The Next.js framework now has static site generation, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at exactly how that works. If you'd like to follow along with this video, I'm going to be starting from a blank Next.js project. And the way I generated that is just by running Mpx create next app in my terminal, and then you also specify the name of your project or folder. In this case, I just called it test blog. And then if you open up, or if you run this command and open up the folder, what it's going to look like is the following on the left here. I just have this open in VS Code. And then there should be a single page inside of there called index.js. And this is where we're going to start from. Now, the thing with static site generation is it's great when you have a lot of different pages on your site, which are basically the same thing. You have kind of like a template that you want to reuse, but you want to put different data in it. And this data, you have available to you at build time, or you want to generate these pages ahead of time and put on your website. And so a great use case for this is a blog. And so what I figured I'd do is I kind of attempted to remake my own blog with Next.js. Now my blog is super simple. All I have is 2 posts. And the way that I do it is I write my posts in Markdown. So this is the first post. This is just an FAQ. And how my posts work is at the top, there's some metadata in the Markdown. And notice the file is called .md, and that's because it's written in Markdown. And here's just, the title and the description. This is kind of metadata that I want on the page. And then below here is the actual content of the page, and it's written in Markdown. Here's another one right here. And I'll link both of these articles or Markdown files in the description if you want to follow along and use the exact same Markdown as me. Otherwise, you can write your own Markdown and use the posts like this. So this is basically the data for my site. And with static site generation, there's basically 2 things. You need to have your template, and then you need to have the data that you need to pump through your template to generate the pages. All right, so this is the data I'm going to be using. Now let's start with creating the template. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file here. And now you'll notice I have 2 different posts. And so I want these to be on 2 different pages. And I may have 20 different posts. I want them to be on 20 different pages. So if we want dynamic pages, we're going to need dynamic routes. And so the way you do this in Next.js is to do brackets in your file name. And inside of this, give your, the dynamic name a parameter name. So the parameter name I'm going to use is call it slug. And I'm going to call it slug.js. So this may look a little weird for a file name, but that is basically a variable inside the file name. And so we're actually going to use the slug name there in our code. And then I'm just going to import from React, because we're going to be doing some React stuff. And then I'm going to start off with a export default, and we're going to create a post component. So I'm going to just say up here const post. And for now, we're just going to return a div that says hello. All right, so this is how we would normally do things in Next.js. We have a component that we write, and then we export that component, and Next.js will create a route for us based on that. Now, Next.js introduced 2 new functions that we can use for static site generation. So the first one that we are going to start off with is called getStaticPaths. And this is going to be a function that we are going to fill in. And this function is also asynchronous. An important part about this function is we're also exporting it. So that way Next.js can import this and do the things that it needs to do. Now, what we're going to return here is an object, and it's going to have 2 things. A paths property, and this is going to be an array, which we're going to fill out in a second. And then the second property is called fallback, which we're going to set to false for now. And setting it to false just means we're going to build everything at build time. And we're going to talk more about what fallback does later and what true will do. All right, so what the paths is going to be here is I mentioned that we may have 20 different pages, and we may have 20 different routes that we want to create. And so here we need to tell Next.js what those different paths are. And so we have an async function here where we can run some code and generate what those paths are going to be. So in my case, what I want to do is I want to create a page per post that I have here. And so Next.js gives us a function, but there's no tooling around kind of doing this stuff. So we have to write all of the code for how this works ourselves. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually import a node module here called file system, or FS. So this is actually going to run on the server or on our computer. So we don't have to worry about, this is only accessible if we have access to Node. It won't work in the browser, but that's okay because this is going to be running on the server. So what we're going to do here is just read the files in this folder here to get the different paths. So what I did is, you'll notice I kind of named these different Markdown files FAQ, and I put dashes in the Docker Linux access localhost post. And so I'm going to use that as the slug or the path for my particular page. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say const files is equal to fs.read reader sync. Now sync just means it's not going to return a promise. We could also use the asynchronous one because we can await things since this is an async function, but I'm just going to make it synchronous to keep it simple. And we're just going to read the posts folder. And so what this will do is this will give us an array of strings back and just the file names inside of the folder. Now you notice there is a .md at the end there, so I want to strip that out. And so what I'm going to do here is the paths, I'm going to say files.map, so we're going to create some different objects here. And so this is going to be the file name, and we're going to return an object. And this object here is going to have the following key called params. And params, we're just going to pass in the parameters for this particular page. So you notice how we called this thing slug there. We're going to have to use slug here. So all the params we're going to pass in here. And then I'm just going to say file name, and I'm going to say replace, and I'm going to get rid of .md and just do an empty string. And just to show you what this looks like for the paths in the files, I'm going to console log both of them. So why don't I just say paths and bring this up here. And then down here, I'm just going to return the variable. And then I'm going to console log paths. And let's console log files. All right. So now when this function runs, we can see what the output of these guys are. And you'll see this makes a lot of sense. And then there's another function we are now going to use to actually fetch the content of the post. So I'm going to say export const get static props. And again, you'll notice we're exporting this, and we're also going to make this async. And here I'm going to return props. So we're returning an object with props inside of it, and anything we put in this props object is going to be passed to our component. And so what this function gets passed is the parameter that we need to fetch data for. So we're going to destructure this, we're going to say params, and then we know the name of our parameter is slug here. And then we just pass any kind of data that we want to here. In this case, I'm just going to pass the slug in for now. Later on, we're going to add some more stuff to this, but for now, just to show you how this all comes together, we're going to pass in slug here. So then in my post here, I can access that prop, which is called slug, and I'm going to display it here. So the slug for this page is, and then we'll display the slug. So basically, these are the two functions that we're going to be dealing with. And then this is the template part of our static site generation. And these two functions deal with how the data that we need for our template. In this particular one, we create the different paths that we need. And for this one, we fetch the data, which we haven't done quite yet because I just wanted to render this and make sure it's working so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say yarn dev, or you can do npm dev, or I guess npm run dev. And if we look in our package.json, this just runs next.dev, and this starts up a local server, which we can actually go look at this. So I'm going to keep my log open because I want to see these console logs. And I'm just going to come over to my browser over here. I'm on localhost 3000, and I'm just going to go to /FAQ. And you can see this is going to be, I haven't actually gone to this page yet. This is just the index page. And I don't need any of this stuff in index.js, so why don't I just clear that out to make it simple. And actually, why don't we create a link? So I'm going to create a link here. That way we can go to our FAQ page. So this is how you create a link in Next.js. So I just went to the index.js file and I cleared out everything. And here I'm just going to say, go to FAQ, and we're going to say href/FAQ. And then up here, I'm going to import link from, and this is going to be next/link. And I don't need this class name. So link is a special component from Next.js that you can actually use to navigate pages. And then this is the syntax that you use. Your href here, and then this is just the text that you want to display. All right, so now I see my link here, and I'm just going to click it to go to the FAQ. And then I notice how the URL changes. We're on FAQ, and it says this slug is for the page FAQ. And now if I go, I'm going to open this up so you can see our console log should fire. And if I open this up, I see it. So you can see these are the pages that were created. So you'll notice how we read the files from our file system. In this case, we have two files, this one and this one. And then all I did was I generated the paths or the pages based on that. So we have two pages. One of them is this one and the other one is this one. So now I can go to either one of these URLs. So I could also go here if I wanted to. Could do / the Docker Linux access localhost, and you'll see this. Now if I were to go to any other page, like random post, all right, it's going to tell me a 404 because this page has not been created. All right, so that is what our setup is. So really the next step is to actually display the content of our post here. So we kind of have this all wired up and we saw how we are feeding the data in. The next part is to actually, pass this. So when we actually go to one of these pages to get the data that is actually displayed here, we need to do stuff in our get static props. And then we have access to that inside our component here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this slug and I'm going to read the markdown that we have over here. All right, so let's start with the file system. And we are going to read a file. And we're going to read this file synchronously. So here I'm going to say contents is equal to fs.readFile. And I'm going to say path.join. And here I'm going to import join. Path. So this is another node module. You don't need to install anything to get access to this. And what we'll do here is the contents of our markdown file we're just going to read. So all we're going to do is we're going to say posts, and we're going to have slug. And you'll remember our slug here doesn't have .md at the end, so we need to add that back here to actually read the file. So we can say plus.md. And the reason why I'm doing path.join is this will just build the path no matter what file system you're on correctly. So if you're on a Mac, or Linux, it'll do post/faq.md. But if you're on a Windows machine, it may use a / like that. So path.join just makes sure it works correctly and joins them with the right stuff. All right, so I can now just pass the contents in here so you can see what the contents is. And here, I'm just going to display the contents. So I'm going to say div contents below, and I'm going to just stick this in a pre-tag. So I got rid of the slug. I'm now going to import or grab the contents prop. All right, so now I'm going to refresh the page. Error serializing contents. I messed something up. I was thinking contents was going to be a string, but it looks like it's a buffer because that's what this returns. I think I just have to say toString. So that's another thing that's important to note. You cannot pass objects, or it needs to be serialized objects to this particular object, right? So it has to be numbers, floats, booleans, strings. And we just saw if you don't do that, we get an error that says it's not serializable. And actually, let me show you that error so in case you run across it, you can just make sure. All right, so remember this error. If you get JSON is not serializable, that is why. In this case, I was passing a buffer. All right, so let's put this back in. I'll toString it. And now we can see the contents of our blog, right? But we also see like the metadata up here, and this is not basically markdowning it. Like it's not turning it into an HTML file. And that's really the next step that we need to do. And again, Next.js doesn't have any tooling for us yet. And so we are going to actually do that ourselves. So the first thing we're going to do is parse that metadata that we have at the top there. So a popular library to do this is called gray matter. And all that gray matter does is takes this and sticks it in an object for us. So we can give it a string and it's going to generate an object like this that we can actually access. All right, so we're going to install gray matter and just use it like this. So actually let's copy this and then we just call it like this. All right, so I'm going to say yarn add gray matter. And then I'm going to import matter from gray matter. And then here I'm just going to call this markdown. And then the contents of the page I'm actually going to, or I can call this markdown with metadata. All right, and then we're just going to say here this is going to be parsed markdown is going to be matter, and we're going to just pass our markdown with metadata. All right, so what this is going to give us is the contents. All right, and we can actually just pass this directly in if we want to. And then the data is going to be parsed markdown.data. And then here I can actually access contents and data, and then what I can do is I'm going to just do a fragment, and up here I'm going to say a head tag, and I'm going to import that from Next/head. And what this allows us to do is we can say update the title. All right, so data.title. So I'd like the title of my page to match whatever I put here. And so what that will do, if we come back to our code over here and I refresh, oh, I need to restart my server. So run yarn dev again. All right, we'll let this boot up. And I refresh. You'll notice the metadata is gone from the page now, and now it's in my title, which is exactly what I want. And if I go to /FAQ, it's going to update the title of my page to what I have there. So awesome. Right? And then you'll notice I also have the description. If I wanted to, I can add a meta tag for that. To be honest, I don't even remember what the syntax for this is. I think it's like title, and this I'll say description, and the content is going to be data.description. This might be the right meta tag. I can't remember, to be totally honest, but that'll give you the idea. We can get whatever data we want here, and we can update meta tags like this if we want to. All right, so the last step is to actually get our markdown to render. We haven't done that yet. All that gray matter does is parse out the metadata. It doesn't actually take the parsed markdown and turn it into HTML. And so for that, we're going to use a separate markdown parser. And so I'm going to use a parser called marked, but honestly, you get to choose your favorite one here because you're building it. Remark is another popular one with a bunch of different plugins. You might like that one. And so all we're going to do with this is install this, do npm install marked, or I'm going to do yarn add. And we're just going to import marked from marked. And then down here, we're going to say HTML string is equal to marked parsed markdown.content. So what this does is it's going to take the HTML markdown, or sorry, the markdown string, which is in the content right there, and it's going to turn it into an HTML string. So that's what I'm going to pass in here. And then I'm going to access this HTML string instead of contents here. And then React, to render an HTML string, what we do is we say div, and we say dangerously set enter HTML, and we pass in an object, and we say underscore underscore HTML, and then we pass in that HTML string. All right, and we'll give that a save. And now I'm going to come over to my FAQ, and I'm going to refresh the page. I need to start my server first. And now that markdown should be turned into HTML. So the hashtags should be turned into divs headers. And if we refresh this, we can see if that's the case. And awesome, it is. So now we can see the page, our markdown page has been rendered. And if I go back to our home page or our Linux one, that one should hopefully be as well. Oh, this is the /blog. We're going to do that in a second. All right, we can see this page is also being rendered as well. So awesome. So we got it now working that we can parse the data. In this case, we're getting our data locally from some markdown files, and then we're just parsing those files in the get static props, which we pass to our component. And then our component just uses that to render it. And one thing that I wanted to mention as well with this is a lot of times you may want to give your pages a prefix. So in this case, I can just create a new folder, for example, blog, and I can stick the file inside of the blog folder. So now the path is going to be /blog/slug.js. And then all that does is now this file does not exist. We have to go to /blog and then the docker-linux-access, right? And same with the FAQ. Now we have a nice blog indentation. And now if I come back over to my home page, I can have a single link. That was the other thing I wanted to show you. So on our home page now, I might want to link to each one of my posts, right? That's a very common thing you may want to do. And so what we can do is we don't actually want to statically generate anything on this page or static site generation on this particular home page. We just want to get some static data. And so we can use that static function. So I can say export const get static props here. And I can make this async as well. So I don't have to actually use the get static paths in every page if I don't want to generate any pages. So in this case, I just want to pass in some props. So in this case, what I want to do is the same thing I would do to my slug over here, is just read the posts directory. So I can get these files, and I just need to import file system from fs. And so in the props here, what I can do is I can pass in the files, right? And if I want to instead call it like posts and do files.map and maybe just replace the file name, could do it like that, and then I can access it here. So I have access to posts, and I can say post.map for each post. And really this is not really a post, it's really just a slug, so why don't we call it slugs. So for each slug, I can render a link. All right, so we have our slugs we're mapping through, and I'm gonna give this a key because we're mapping through. Every time you do an array in React, you wanna add a key. Could do our slug, and then our href is going to be right /blog/ and then we add the slug. And then we may want to do the same thing here as well. All right, for the content here, so you can see where you're going. So here I can say slugs, and now let's go to this page, refresh. Oh, you know what? They're all mashing together. Let's wrap these in a div then. And so I need to make sure to move the key up to the div here. You just want to add the key to the component that's at the outer level, and that's going to be the div. All right, so now I can see the pages on my blog, and now I can click and access them. And then go back, go to my FAQ, and then now I have this whole system set up. What I can do is I can add a new post like my first day.md. I can add whatever content I want to add here. I can add my description. All right, I don't know, you get the gist. You can write a better blog post. Okay, it's just 3 ticks, not 4. And there we go. Now if I come back over here, I refresh the page, there's now a new blog post, right, that it read from the file system, and we can access that and we can see our blog there, test, and we can see the stuff. So now we have this whole system set up. We can add blog posts, and it's all going to work and generate the pages for us. One last thing I wanted to mention about static sites like that you're generating is how to actually go about deploying them. So once we have this all set up and we're happy with this and we want to actually publish this to the internet, how do we do that with Next.js? So to actually do this, the first thing you're going to do is run yarn build. So Next.js actually already has in the package.json a build command that you can run, and that will create basically a output of a generated Next.js project. And then to make it static, add a new script here called export, and then there's a command called next export, which will take the built Next.js code and generate a static site from it. All right, so I'm just going to come up over here, and the cool thing about this is when you run yarn build, you can also see the different pages that you have created, and you can also see what kind of pages they are. So you can see that we have two pages, the index page and the blog page. Well, we also have this 404, but the blog page are the two that we statically generated, or static site generation. You can see that down here, it has this symbol associated with it. And then after this is built, and you can see this page sizes and all that fun stuff, we can say yarn export. And what this will do is it'll generate that static site I was talking about. And if you go to the out file, so you should have gotten a new file in the folder over here called out, and you can actually see this is where your code is. So you can see this is index.html, and if I save this, I can see the styled page. In this case, I can see the links in here. And if I go to blog, I can see the different FAQ.html and my Docker and my first day, and you can see all the HTML's output. So then this out file here, I can then upload to anywhere that can deploy or host HTML files. And that's pretty much all there is to deploying this. And if you want to just test this locally, you can run Mpx Serve. This starts up a local file system, or sorry, a local server which can just serve HTML files, and you just point it at the out folder. And then you can go to I believe it's localhost 5000. We'll see when this is done here. Yep, 5000, and this will actually let you copy this, view the created site. So this is the from static HTML that we built, and then we can access this, and you can see this is my generated site. So again, this is what you'd actually just upload to, say, S3 or wherever you wanted to actually deploy this. All right, but there you go. That is an introduction into Next.js static site generation. And as you can see, the get static paths and the get static props are very flexible. You can write whatever code you want inside of there, and you can create kind of your own tooling. We ended up reading files from the file system, but that could have been a fetch to an API to get the posts. If we want to work with, say, like a headless CMS or something like that, we could. But if you like this video, let me know in the comments below, and I can do some more Next.js videos. We didn't end up covering the fallback prop, so we can talk about that in a future video and how this interacts with server-side rendering.